Hey guys, it's Greg Alexander again, and today I want to talk about all the different ways to rig a Senko. Now before you click off because you think you've seen it all, I got multiple ways to rig this Senko, and the one I'm going to expose last in this video is going to be a way that probably most of you have never seen or even thought about before, and it's a good way to do it that nobody's doing it, a new type of presentation. So stick with me for that. So for those of you who are new to bass fishing, you may have heard about a Senko, you may not have heard about a Senko. So what is a Senko? I mean, come on, bear with me now, you guys know, just hang on for a second. A Senko is a straight salt-filled stick worm. Now, probably one of the best baits of all time as far as the number of fish you can catch on it, even size of fish, and ease of fishing, which you can fish on just about any type of equipment. So let's start real quick and real simple here with the Senko. The first way that you can rig a Senko, that's probably the most rigged way, the easiest way, the simplest way, if you're just going to fish it one way, I would say you would want to rig it Texas rig weedless. Texas rig weedless and weightless. So how do you do that? You take a 3/0 or a 4/0 EWG style hook and you rig the Senko. You stick the point down into it till it's flat. Come out the side, slide it up the hook, over your little bend section, measure where the hook goes, straight through, sitting reasonably straight, and then you want to just push that worm up a little bit and hook it back onto the hook. Alright, that's probably the easiest way to fish it, the easiest way to rig it. Now, once you've rigged it this way, you can throw it anywhere you want. You can throw it in cover or no cover, skip it under docks, even throw it out over schooling fish, and you'll catch fish on it. And then you just, obviously you're just going to change the color based on the conditions and the water color. Darker the water, darker the worm, darker the day, darker the worm, clearer the water, more realistic baits like watermelon, green pumpkin, dirty water, darker baits like black and blue, black, ones like that. And then you can add a little flash to it. So, but we're talking about rigging today. So you can also rig it with a bullet weight, right? You put a bullet weight on your line and flip it like you flip any type of worm or creature bait into any type of cover. And then of course you're going to alternate or change your weight from lighter to heavier depending on what you're fishing. Deeper, heavier; shallower, lighter; more finessey, lighter; more reaction bite, heavier. Need to get through cover, heavier. Don't need to get through cover, lighter. From 1/8 of an ounce to upwards of an ounce, or even some people when you're punching grass will throw up to 2 ounces. So that's the Texas rig Senko. Now, the next way that you would rig it would be what they call wacky. Now, wacky style is you're just going to take your Senko and you're going to put a hook somewhere in the middle of that worm. So, if you're not around any cover at all, fishing open areas, you're just going to use an open hook. And you're just going to stick it straight through the egg sac or the smooth part of that Senko, and you're going to throw it out. And you want to use an open hook. I just use an open round bend hook like a 2/0, even a 1/0 will work, or even a bigger one will work if you need a little bit more weight. But the bigger you hook, the more the fish has to look at, and gives them more of a chance of saying that something's not right. So you want to stay with the smallest hook that you can get away with, but you don't want a real small hook because that's a bulky bait. It's a thick body, bulky bait, so you need some hook there. So that's wacky. And what a wacky does when you throw it out is it just sinks like this. Fish can't stand it. You'll catch a lot of fish doing that. Now there's other ways to rig wacky. You can rig wacky with an O-ring. O-ring, little black rubber ring. They make a tool. This is an O-ring tool. You can put, you can pre-put a load of O-rings up on this little screw part here, and they're already loaded and they won't fall off, see what's on there. And then you want to slide that O-ring down onto your tool. Slide it down onto the tool. Stick your Senko into the tool. I like to stop it right about where the egg sac is again. And then slide the O-ring onto the egg sac. Now, then you can take whichever hook, this, if you're not around cover, an open hook, and just hook it underneath of the O-ring. Well, what's that do for you? That makes that Senko last forever. Because if you just stick the hook straight through the center of the Senko, Senkos are very brittle. Some other brands of stick baits aren't as brittle as the Senko, but the Senko has probably the most salt in it, which makes it more brittle, which also makes it, a fish hold on to it a little bit better. So that'll make it last. Now that's one way to rig it, but if I'm going to rig it with an O-ring, which I usually don't rig it with an O-ring, I'm just going to stick it through the worm generally because I feel like it has, better hookup and better action that way. Then I'm going to use a different type of O-ring a lot of times. So they make another O-ring, which is called the Frenzy Perfect Wacky. And what's the difference between this O-ring and the other O-ring? Well, if you can see on the top of that O-ring, I'm going to come in real close, is another little place to put your hook. And why is that better? Well, it's better for two reasons. First of all, your hook is not down as far into the worm under the O-ring, so it's up a little higher. And it also turns the hook in the proper direction. See, with this way, regular way, the hook goes under the O-ring and the hook point is behind the body of the fish. Well, what's that do? If he comes up from underneath of it, he's going to fold that Senko over on top of the hook and you may miss him. You may get the hook through the worm and into him, but you got a good chance of missing him. So the other O-ring, when you put that on there, and I'm not going to slide it on there, but when you put the other O-ring on there, the hook sits like this. You understand? Sideways to the worm. So now you have a hook that's not encumbered or have any interference from the worm whatsoever with that perfect O-ring. So if you're going to use O-ring, probably use that perfect O-ring. It's probably a little better on the hookup, although the hookup's not going to be bad on this one either. Now, while we have the O-ring in the bait, let's talk about the next way to rig it. And the next way to rig a Senko would be what they call Nico style. And there's two different Nico styles, And with the Nico style, what you want to do is you can use the O-ring or you cannot use the O-ring. You can just go through the worm. But if you're going to use the O-ring, you're going to take your Nico hook, which generally I'm not going to throw a hook that big with Nico. I'm going to throw like a 1/0. This is like a 2/0. And you're going to hook it from the head, where the hook would go in the head, towards the back of the worm. Right? Just like you did regular wacky style. Except you want to make sure that that hook is pointed towards the tail of the worm. And why does it need to be towards the tail of the worm? Well, when you add your weight, which makes it a Nico style, you add your nail weight or some other weights I'm going to show you into the head of the worm. This is an 1/8 ounce weight, and this particular weight, you can snap it off and make it lighter if you need to. And you stick it right into the head of the worm, like so. So when you're working that worm now, see, the head's going to stay down, then the tail's going to stay up as you're working it across the bottom. You understand that it's going to go to the bottom, it's going to stand up like that, it's going to start to fall, but then you're going to work it, and it's going to make it like a stand-up worm. A lot of action. Plus, what the Nico weight also does with the Senko is on the way down, it makes the Senko swirl down. Right? It makes it skate down, which gives it more action on the fall, especially if you make it a little bit lighter. The heavier you make the Nico weight, the less swirl and action you're going to get on the fall. So if you want more action, use a lighter weight, break some of that weight off. And now you can bury that weight all the way in there if you're around a lot of cover. But if you're on, slick bottoms or fishing it around rock, sometimes it's a good idea to leave that weight sticking out a little bit. And the reason you want to leave that weight sticking out a little bit is that makes a clicking noise as that weight is bouncing through the rocks. It's almost like adding a rattle to your bait. So then there's other Nico weights that you can throw. They make special, insert weights like this, which you can just stick into the head of the bait. Stick right into the head of the bait, and it's got two little keepers on it. And then that adds the weight also. And in this situation, it's always going to be clicking, see, because that's sticking out. And then you can, if you want to save money, you can go to the hardware store and buy you some little short panhead stainless steel wood screws. And you can twist them in to the head of the worm, and that'll save you a lot of money for what they charge for these Nikos. But you want to use like stainless steel, obviously, because you don't want to get into a rusting issue if they're in your box getting wet. And in this situation, I'm going to put the weight, well, let's first talk about it in the head. You can use a screw lock bullet weight in the head, and you can just screw that in there. Problem with those screw lock weights, they work great. They're quick and easy, but they're expensive. And you're gonna lose some, you're gonna lose quite a few of these, especially if you don't use an O-ring, you're gonna lose a lot of them. But with the O-ring, you might be okay, but you tend to cast these off also. But that's something you could use, if you ran out of Nico weights or you just wanted to try something a little different, you can use a screw lock weight. Now, here's the next way that you would rig the Senko. The next way you would rig the Senko would be to tail weight it, not head weight it, but tail weight it, okay? There's really no advantage to tail weighting it with a Nico system. It's just going to go this way instead of that way. But if you did stick the weight in the tail of the worm, you'd want to turn your hook around so that the hook point was facing away from the weight. And I didn't say why that was important, but the reason it's why that's important for the hook to be faced away from the head is the hook is up. Then you understand, with the weight down here, the hook is up. So when the fish comes behind it, he's going to get the hook. So if you put the hook on the other way, let's just stick it on there, and the weight's in the head, then the hook's down. You understand? So it's almost weedless to the fish's mouth then. So make sure you put the hook in properly. So the next way to rig a Senko is, what I was getting ready to say, is to tail weight it. And you can use any of these Nico weights again, like we did. to stick the Neko weight in the tail of the worm instead of the head. And you can use what we talked about, a screw, one of these insert weights, a regular Neko weight, a screw lock bullet weight, any of it. But in this situation, I'm going to probably Texas rig it. And you understand what happens here when you Texas rig it? When you pull that thing up, it's going to fall backwards. It's going to fall backwards. So you can kind of work it quick, but not cover near as much ground, where if you pull it and the front falls, it skates forward. It's going to back up when you let off of it. So tail weighting the worm, another time I tail weight the worm or a Senko is when I'm trying to get through cover. And the reason I would do that is if you put a bullet weight on the front of this worm, like so, and you flip it into a tree, it's got to turn and pull the line and everything down into that hole. Whereas if it's tail weighted and you flip it into a little hole, it just goes straight through. Nothing has to turn, the line doesn't have to turn, and it just goes straight through, and it's just going to penetrate a lot better tail weighted. So another hook you can throw when you're wacky rigging, I'm backing up a little bit here, is you can throw a weedless style hook. See, it has little weed guards on it, fluorocarbon weed guards if you're around some cover, or the other type of hook which has kind of a weed guard on it. This is a trocar hook. Now this one's a little larger than I would normally use. I would normally use, for if I'm doing wacky rig weedless, I'm going to throw maybe the 1/0 size of weedless wacky rig hook. So here's another way to rig a Senko. Now you can rig a Senko on a drop shot. Most of y'all are familiar with the drop shot. I'm not going to pull the rig out tonight and show you what that is, other than to say it's a hook tied with a Palomar knot above a weight on the line below it, from 2-3 inches to 2 foot, 3 foot, sometimes even more than that, above the weight, for vertical presentations, clear water situations, finesse situations. So, but don't make this mistake. One of the biggest mistakes you can make when rigging a Senko on a drop shot is to rig it Texas style. And when I say Texas style, let me get this hook here, like we talked about in the beginning, where you're rigging it Texas style on your drop shot. Well, why not? Well, the problem with the Senko over typical drop shot baits is a Senko is heavy. It sinks. Senko. It sinks because it has a lot of salt in it. So when you put a Senko Texas rig onto a drop shot bait, it's going to want to hang like that. And with the drop shot bait, you want your bait to stick out straight as much as possible. And a Senko, you know, when you drop it, it's going to do like that, and then that tail's just going to fall right down. And it's going to go right down, straight up and down. So the way to fish a Senko versus a regular, you know, a lot of drop shot baits have, you know, they don't have salt in them, or they're light and they're made to stand up on the side, is you need to rig a Senko on a drop shot wacky style. And the reason you're going to rig it wacky style is because it's going to sit like that, you understand, so that both sides will be straight out. If it's going to hang, both sides are going to hang. So it's probably even best, if you're going to drop shot a Senko, is to use, you know, a 3-inch or a 4-inch Senko instead of a 5-inch or even a 6-inch Senko. More finessey. It's going to want to stay vertical rigged weedless if you need to be weedless, or not weedless if you're in open water, wacky style, and that's the perfect way to rig a Senko drop shot style. Now, Z-Man makes one that floats. With the Z-Man, you can rig it regular, nose hook it like you do, with a regular deal. You would just nose hook it with a regular drop shot. You can do that with them because they float, so that one will stay out. But most of the other brands of stick worms, especially Senko, are going to sink, and it's not going to be rigged properly if you nose hook it or Texas rig it like you would normally do with other drop shot style baits. So the next way that you can rig a Senko is with a belly weighted hook. Right, this belly weighted hook is going to give it a little bit more of a skating action again. Let me take that weight out into that Senko. It's going to give it a little bit more of a skating action. Now this hook is larger than I would throw. I just grabbed a big hook so you could see it easily. It has a screw lock on it, so when you put the screw lock in there, just twist it on. This is basically a swim bait hook, but you can use it for Senko to get a little bit different action. It gives the fish something else to see. And then you would just Texas rig it like you would normally do through the middle. And then see, now you have the weight, which is not all the way to the head, and it's not in the center of the tail. It is kind of, towards the head. So what that does is that if it falls straight down with like a bullet weight, it's going to fall more like a slide. It's going to slide down. So that's another way to rig it. Now, let me unrig that. Another way to rig a Senko is with a Tokyo rig. Tokyo rig, you can put any soft plastic on, but especially a Senko. And a Tokyo rig is basically just a Texas rig hook with a ring, a swivel, a piece of wire, and then whatever size bullet weight that you want on the bottom. And with the bullet weight, you just stick it on there and bend the end over, like so. And then what that does, basically, it just keeps the Senko up off of the bottom as you're working it. So you're working it in, and it's just keeping it, that 2 or 3 inches off of the bottom where the fish has a good look, can see it from a farther distance. And when they grab a hold of it, they don't have to suck it off the bottom and try to spit a bunch of dirt and mud out. And they get a better bite of it. So I'm going to talk about how to make your own Tokyo rigs in one of my upcoming videos. Save you a lot of money. So let's keep right on going here. Another way to rig the Senko is on a shaky head. Now this is a heavier shaky head, a heavier football shaky head. And that's pretty simple. Again, I use the little screw locks, and you just twist your Senko onto the screw lock. The Senko's had seen its day here. I got a fresh one here. You just twist it onto the screw lock like you would. You know what? I'm not going to. Twist it onto the screw lock and hook it in like you normally would. And the advantages of a shaky head over a bullet weight is, again, just a different action. And again, if you have that football style head, you're going to get more shimmy. You're going to get more shimmy out of it as you're working it across the bottom. And like I talked about in one of my previous videos, depending on how the shaky head is set up and where the line tie is, and whether it's a stand-up head or a round head or has a flat spot on it, is all going to depend on how that bait actually sits in the water. So you can mix up your shaky heads with the Senko also, from light to heavy, depending on how deep you're fishing again, or how much finesse you're looking for. More finesse, lighter bait, less finesse, a deeper bait. So that's another way. And here's the next way that you can rig a Senko. Is you can take your wacky rig and you can take a jig head. Now this one is a little small weedless jig head, and you just stick your hook, wacky rig through the center like you would. You can use that little O-ring, but I prefer the frenzy O-ring, again with the little side piece on it, if you're doing it that way. And what that does is that just adds weight to get the wacky rig down faster. So instead of getting this type of action sinking slow, when it's sinking fast, you're going to get more of this type of action where it's bent and it's going to be moving really quick with the weight on it. And the good thing about that is it's just a different presentation. It's almost like, I don't know how many of you guys remember the flick shake. You know, they got big for a while where they were taking the little finesse worms that had a built-in crook in the tail and putting a little small weighted jig head through the finesse worm to get that kind of skating, shimmying action, flick shake. But that's the same thing we're doing here with the Senko, except we're doing it with the Senko. And don't be limited by the head size. This is like 1/8 of an ounce. It'd be a good weight, you know, for shallow water situations. If you're fishing a little bit deeper, or even fishing off of points and things like that, so you can fish a 1/2 ounce weight on it and get that Senko wacky rig to the bottom in deeper water. And then as you're pulling, you know, for example, let's take this Senko right here. As you're pulling that Senko in, you know, 8, 10, 12 foot of water with a deeper 1/2 ounce or 5/8 or 3/4 jig head, football head, that thing's coming across the bottom dancing, where those fish have never really seen anything just exactly like that before, or very rarely, because people aren't doing, you know, that type of thing too much. Now that's going to work better, you know, in clearer water, but it still will work in dirty water also, because you're going to have plenty of vibration and sound in that situation. Let's go to the last way to rig a Senko that you probably have never seen before. And I'm going to call this 2 different things. I'm going to call this Texas Wacky, or hover strolling a Senko, weightless. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your Texas rig EWG hook with the keeper, not a straight shank, and you're going to hold it up next to your Senko, and you're going to split the difference between the front of the hook and the back of the hook on the egg sac portion. And then you're going to stick your hook through that front portion of the Senko. Come all the way through. Your line's already tied to it. I'm not going to do that today. And that hook's going to sit kind of like right up on top there. And then you're going to measure the back, and you're going to put it through Texas rig. And then you're going to Tex pose it, or push the worm up and let it settle back down onto the hook point. And see, now you have Texas rig wacky. And what's good about that? Well, that's really, really extremely weedless. Plus it gives you a skate shimmy. You understand? Because you've knocked out this area of the worm and its ability to bend in that area. That worm can barely shimmy, but it's going to skate towards your line. And it's going to shake like that as it's skating towards your line. So again, you know, like with fishing, you got to stay ahead of the trends. And one of the ways to stay ahead of the trends is give the fish the same lure you've been throwing with a different action, or a different fall rate, or a different, you know, color sometimes. So that's going to give you a different action than that the fish have ever seen before with a Senko. And it's extremely weightless. You can throw it anywhere you want, but it's going to be best around, you know, lighter cover so it has the ability to skate. Now, you could add a little tiny bit of weight to it, but that kind of would be against the, you know, going against the grain with this particular type of situation. So this is Texas Wacky. Never seen it before. I'm the only one that's doing it that I know of. Maybe somebody's been doing it and I just haven't seen it. So it's just something to throw in, especially when you're around pressured fish. You know, early in the year when you're first getting out there, pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, the fish will eat anything. But as you know, as the year goes on into fall, early fall, late summer, man, they've seen everything. And that's when you pull out the Texas Wacky or different applications of the Senko like we've been talking about. Now, as far as line size goes with a Senko, it depends on what you're doing. If you're fishing this 1/2 ounce or 5/8 ounce Nico rig, you know, in deeper water, then you may throw 16 or 20 pound fluorocarbon. If you're wacky rigging in clear water, you know, you may be throwing a medium action spinning rod, 6.6 to 7.6 even, with 8 pound fluorocarbon on it, with a braid leader, with a braid and then a 8 pound leader, or just straight fluorocarbon, depending on how much sink you want. And if you're fishing, you know, any of these other techniques, you know, the amount of weight that you're putting on your Senko and the action that you're expecting would dictate the action of your rod and the action and the test of your line. So, you know, we could go through all of them. I'm probably not going to go through all those different, you know, products today as far as line size and rod, but just keep in mind that you don't want to over rod or over line your bait. So you always want, you know, the lightest line that you can get away with and not lose fish all the time, especially with a Senko, because Senko is generally a finesse tactic, although Texas rigging, you know, on a heavy weight or on a big jig head or something like that is not going to be a finesse tactic. And then you're going to up your line, up your rod to match it. Those are all of the ways to rig a Senko, including some you've never seen before. So again, I hope this video helps you to catch more fish. Go out and try these things. This works. These things work. Beat your friends when you're out fishing or catch more fish or win some tournaments doing it. Again, if you like my videos and want to watch me on a regular basis, then please hit the subscribe button, the like button, and the little alert bell thing. I thank you. Please put a comment in the bottom. It helps grow the channel. And thanks for watching, and have a blessed day.